The open road has always symbolized freedom and adventure, but it can also be a place of fear and mystery. Horror stories set on the road tap into the primal fears of isolation, the unknown, and the supernatural. Whether it's a deserted highway, a foggy country lane, or a winding mountain pass, these tales of terror capture the spine-chilling moments when drivers encounter the unexplainable. From ghostly apparitions and cursed vehicles to sinister hitchhikers and haunted rest stops, road horror stories remind us that the journey can sometimes be more frightening than the destination. Here are the chilling stories that will make you never want to drive alone again. Jack had always loved night drives. The quiet hum of his car engine, the open road, and the peace that came with the absence of other vehicles. One fateful night, his love for these solitary journeys would lead him to a chilling encounter that he would never forget. It was a moonless night, and Jack was driving back from a friend's house after a late-night gathering. He decided to take a shortcut through Hollow Creek Road, a path he had avoided in the past due to its reputation. Local legends spoke of eerie sightings and strange occurrences, but Jack dismissed them as mere stories meant to scare children. As he turned onto Hollow Creek Road, a thick fog began to settle, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. Jack slowed down, his eyes straining to see through the mist. The trees lining the road seemed to close in, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Suddenly, his headlights caught something on the road. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he saw a figure standing in the middle of the lane. He hit the brakes, but it was too late. The car went through the figure, and Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He pulled over, shaking, and looked back. The road was empty. Jack sat there for a moment, trying to calm his racing heart. He convinced himself it was just a trick of the light and the fog playing games with his mind. He took a deep breath and resumed his drive, albeit more cautiously. A few miles down the road, the fog grew thicker. Jack's headlights flickered, and the car's temperature plummeted. He glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. There, in the back seat, was a ghostly figure of a woman. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, and her long hair dripped with water. Panic surged through Jack. He wanted to stop, to run, but he couldn't move. The ghost's eyes met his in the mirror, and she began to speak in a whisper, her voice cold and distant. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "This road is cursed." Jack's mind raced. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I was Emily," the ghost replied. "I died here many years ago. My car crashed into the creek, and I drowned. Now, I wander this road, warning others of the danger." Jack's fear turned to a mixture of sorrow and curiosity. "How can I help you?" he asked. "Find my car," Emily said. "It's still in the creek. If you can bring it to the surface, maybe I can find peace." Determined to help, Jack agreed. "Where is it?" he asked. Emily's ghost pointed down the road. "Just a bit further. There's a bridge. The creek runs beneath it." Jack drove on, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The fog seemed to guide him, leading him to the old, rickety bridge. He parked the car and got out, his flashlight in hand. The air was cold, and the only sound was the gentle flow of the creek below. Jack made his way down to the water's edge, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist. After a few moments of searching, he saw it, the outline of a car submerged in the creek, its body covered in algae and rust. He knew he couldn't retrieve the car alone. He needed help. He took a deep breath and headed back to his car, planning to return the next day with a tow truck. As he reached his car, he saw Emily's ghost standing by the bridge, watching him. "I'll be back," Jack promised. "I'll get your car out." Emily nodded, her figure fading into the mist. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing completely. The next day, Jack returned with a tow truck and a couple of friends. They managed to pull the car out of the creek, the old vehicle creaking and groaning as it was lifted from the water. As soon as the car was on solid ground, a sense of calm washed over the area. The fog lifted, and the sun broke through the clouds. Jack felt a presence beside him. He turned to see Emily's ghost one last time, her face now peaceful. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can finally rest." With that, she vanished, leaving Jack with a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. He knew he had done something important, something that would stay with him forever. Jack never took Hollow Creek Road again, but he often thought of Emily and the night he helped a restless spirit find peace. The experience changed him, reminding him that some legends are rooted in truth and that sometimes the dead have unfinished business with the living. It was a late, foggy night when Mark was driving home from his friend's house. The road was deserted, and the only light came from his car's headlights cutting through the thick mist. The air was damp, and the silence was eerie. Mark was driving cautiously, but he was eager to get home. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. Mark slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. He felt the sickening thud as the car struck the figure. His heart raced as he pulled over, his hands shaking. He jumped out of the car, expecting the worst. But when he looked around, there was no one there. The road was empty, and the fog seemed to close in on him. Confused and terrified, Mark checked the front of his car. There was no damage, no blood, nothing to indicate he had hit someone. Mark's mind was racing. Did he imagine it? Was it just a trick of the fog? He got back into his car, still shaking, and continued driving, albeit more slowly this time. His eyes darted nervously to the mirrors and the road ahead. As he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air inside the car grew colder, and he felt an unsettling presence. Glancing in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. There, in the back seat, sat a ghostly figure, the same one he had hit. A woman in a tattered dress, her face pale and eyes hollow. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. "Who are you? What do you want?" he stammered. The ghost stared at him with sorrowful eyes. "You hit me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the confined space of the car. "I was trying to find my way home." Mark's fear turned to guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't see you. How can I help you?" The ghost continued to stare, her expression one of sadness and longing. "Take me home," she whispered again, and suddenly, Mark knew where to go. He drove, following an invisible path guided by an instinct he couldn't explain. The car seemed to know the way, winding through the dark, foggy roads. Finally, they reached an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. The ghost looked at Mark one last time, a faint smile on her lips, and then she vanished. The coldness in the car disappeared, and the air felt normal again. Mark sat there for a moment, trying to process what had happened. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief. He had helped the ghost find her way home. As he drove away, he glanced back at the old house, hoping that the spirit had finally found peace. It was a quiet night, and Emily was driving home after a late shift. The road was long and empty, surrounded by dark woods. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves. As she drove, she felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped. She glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. There, in the back seat, sat a woman in an old-fashioned dress. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow. Emily's heart raced, and her hands trembled on the steering wheel. "Who are you?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. The ghostly figure didn't respond. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her expression blank. Emily's mind raced. She hadn't picked up anyone, and the car doors had been locked. Panic surged through her. She wanted to pull over, but the road was too narrow and dark. She kept driving, hoping the ghost would disappear. But the woman remained, silent and eerie. Suddenly, the woman spoke, her voice a cold whisper. "This road. It's where I died." Emily's blood ran cold. She remembered the local legend about a woman who had died in a car accident on this very road. "Please, leave me alone," Emily pleaded, her voice breaking. The ghost looked at her through the rearview mirror, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I need to find peace," she said softly. Emily's fear gave way to sympathy. "How can I help you?" she asked. The ghost smiled faintly and vanished, leaving a cold, empty space in the back seat. Emily drove home, her heart still pounding, but she felt a strange sense of relief. From that night on, Emily made a habit of leaving a small bouquet of flowers by the roadside where the accident had occurred. She never saw the ghost again, but she felt a lingering presence, as if the spirit had finally found peace. John and Sarah were driving home late one night. They took a shortcut through Hollow Road, a narrow path with old trees and broken streetlights. The night was dark and foggy, and the road was almost empty. As they drove, the car's headlights cut through the fog. John, who was driving, felt uneasy. He had heard stories about Hollow Road, but he never believed in ghosts. Sarah, sitting beside him, was looking out the window, trying to see through the thick fog. Suddenly, they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. John hit the brakes hard, and the car screeched to a stop. The figure did not move. It looked like a woman, dressed in white, with long hair covering her face. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," John replied, his heart pounding. "What is she doing out here?" John honked the horn, but the woman didn't react. She just stood there, staring at them through the fog. John felt a chill run down his spine. "I think we should go back," Sarah said, gripping John's arm. John nodded and started to reverse the car. As they backed up, the woman began to walk toward them. Her steps were slow but steady. John's hands shook on the steering wheel. "Faster, John," Sarah urged. John pressed the gas, and the car moved faster. But the woman kept coming closer, her eyes glowing in the dark. John turned the car around and sped down the road. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the woman standing in the middle of the road again, watching them leave. They drove in silence for a while, both of them too scared to speak. When they finally reached the main road, John pulled over, and they both took deep breaths. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," John replied, "but we're never taking Hollow Road again." They continued their drive home, still shaken by what they had seen. From that night on, they avoided Hollow Road. And whenever they heard someone talking about ghost stories, they couldn't help but remember the eerie figure in white on that foggy night. They never found out who or what it was, but they knew one thing for sure: some roads are better left untraveled.